Hello and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com, and this podcast is dedicated to bringing you expert teachers to help you to feel that mind, body, and spirit connection, both with yourself and with your true love. And so today I'm very excited because today I will be interviewing sexuality and intimacy coach Veronica Clark. So, hello, Veronica.
Hi. Hello and hello everybody. So excited. I am really excited to be here, Valerie. I loved already connecting with you. So I'm excited for our conversation.
Yes, yeah, we were chatting beforehand, and Veronica is just such a wealth of information. So I'm excited to introduce her. I'll tell you a little bit about her before we dive in, because basically Veronica is a life reinvention strategist and intimacy coach, which is just really wonderful because she has almost 2 decades in trauma recovery, addiction, sexual healing, wisdom, and she merges mind intricacies with body wisdom. So she's got a wealth of information to teach. She's authored a few books, To Be Aligned and SEX Boss, a guide to embracing your sexual energy for self-mastery and personal empowerment. And she's a sought after keynote speaker, which is amazing. And today she's going to share powerful insights and practical tools to help you reconnect with your inner essence, heal past wounds, and really foster that deep intimacy with yourself. And so I just love that topic because, as we probably have heard, there's that cliche that you can't love someone else until you love yourself. But of course, how do you actually do that? So that's my first question for you, Veronica. I want you to really help us understand, what does inner intimacy mean and why is that so important?
So such a good question. Inner intimacy. I coined that term probably about in 2018 when I started to really peel back some of the layers about the way that I was showing up in my relationships, not only my romantic relationships, but more importantly, my relationship with myself, my relationship with my children, my relationship with other people in my life. And I just started to really see different patterns. And all the patterns really led back to me. And so I started to ask myself, like, how do I want to be loved? And how do I want to love? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How
Mm.
have I been loving? How have I been loving other people? How have I been receiving love? Do I let people love me? Do I, so really this, these questions led me to some deep looking, and, and, and that's what arose for me. It was like this, in order for me to truly be seen, be heard, be loved the way that I would like to be loved, the way that I want to be loved in a nourishing and whole and healthy way, I had to be willing to see that I'm valuable enough to receive that, that I'm capable of being able to give that. And so, it was just, you hear this, I've heard this before, I've heard it, I'd say probably more in the last decade than ever before, but that it begins with self-love and it begins with self. But it wasn't really until that moment and asking those questions that I really started to make the connection. And it wasn't just in my head that, of course, I have to love myself. Of course, I have to take care of myself. Like, self-care and self-love goes beyond just taking care of yourself and pampering yourself and making sure you look good and make sure I'm exercising, make sure I'm like, all those things are important. But these questions led me to the path of intimacy,
Right.
into me see,
Yes.
into myself see. And that's where I began. And so this is what I teach other people now. This is my, my flagship program, I would say, but more even beyond program. It's just that this is such an essential piece of, I think, our human experience, is to learn how to be intimate with ourselves and to explore, well, what does that mean?
Yes. Yes, I know. I love that. phrase intimacy is into me see that you just said. Because yeah, I think that most people think that intimacy is just physical intimacy, i.e., when we're being sexual. And I think that there's that emotional intimacy that people aren't exactly sure what it means. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about when you started asking yourself that question, like, what does love mean to me? And how do I know that I'm loving myself? As opposed to, because, there's like, oh, I can get a massage to love myself. That's
Yeah.
great. That's of course one way, one valid way. And like, I noticed that there's so much depth of wisdom to be gotten when I ask myself, what would it even look like to give myself that same compassion that I would give to a friend when I make a mistake, for example, rather than beating myself up. Um, and that kind of thing. So I'm curious to hear, what were your answers when you first started asking yourself?
Yeah. Well, you've touched on a lot of good points, so I'm probably going to jump around just a little bit more.
Yeah.
It occurred to me, again, looking at these questions and really being able to sit with the questions, not run from them, was one thing that was an interesting experience for me to like really see myself and to literally at one point like stand in the mirror and see myself and really
Mhm.
try not to run or recoil or fix. I noticed myself the first time when I stood in the mirror to do this activity that I felt I felt intuitively called to do, was I wanted to like look away, or I wanted to fix, or I wanted to do something. And I asked myself, like, who is that looking back at me in the
Mm.
mirror? Whose eyes? What are behind those eyes that are looking back at me? And so I just leaned into that, and I leaned into the discomfort, and I leaned into what I didn't want to know about myself, what I didn't want to see beyond the face, beyond whatever my outside looked like. Because it's ultimately not about that. It's just
Right.
we get caught up in it, the outside, but that's actually, we wouldn't even get caught up on what we looked like on the outside if what was on the inside felt lovable enough to us.
Yes, I love that.
Mhm. So I knew that I needed to go deeper.
Hmm.
And so I just stayed in that. I just stayed in that mirror for a little while and just breathed. And I went through um a few waves. I went through some tears. I went through some like resistance of like, okay, I just want to be done. What am I doing? And I just, again, just having that intuitive pulse that hit to just stay for a second longer, stay
Right.
there. And it was beautiful because I realized like I have to be my own best friend. Like I have to be my own best friend. And again, that was another thing that yes, you hear these things, but how do you do that?
Right. Exactly.
How do you do this? So I'm getting these like I feel like I was like sourcing these nuggets, right? Like I'm sourcing and it's like, Veronica, you have to be your friend. Veronica, Veronica, are you listening? Veronica, you have to be your friend. And it was like the mirror was telling me this, right? You have to be your friend. And so I'm like in there and I'm like, okay, this is like a whole journey. It felt like just a whole.
Yes.
And so I did that. I did that for a little bit. And then I just went into some meditation. I just went into reflection and I love doing self-reflection. And this felt like a much deeper process for me. Um, and so it just occurred. I mean, again, it's the things that I'm saying are not necessarily brand new. Even the things that I said to myself were not brand new. I'd heard before, be your own best friend. I've heard into me see means intimacy, but I didn't connect it to my actual experience of life. It was
Yeah.
like it just came into the head and I
Mhm, mhm.
regurgitated what other people said
Yes.
because, right? It's like, okay, yes, that's what we're doing. That's what we do. But this was actually taking it from here and putting it into my body. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, I get it now. Now I get it. What I get is that these parts of me that I don't want to love, or that I think are bad, or that I think are not good enough or not acceptable, all these little parts of me, I'm going to try to hide and protect those things. And I'm not going to let other people see those things that I think are not good. And therefore, only a part of me is showing up in my relationships,
Right.
because the other part of me is desperately trying to protect all the things. I'm trying to protect you from seeing those things because I don't want you to see these ugly things. I'm trying to protect me from getting more hurt or feeling more rejected or feeling more unloved. So I'm only showing up halfway. To
Right.
the extent that I can actually love myself is the extent that I can actually love somebody else.
Yeah.
And right, like I really, really, I started to understand that more deeply because I have children. And so I started with my children, like I can't hold space for them emotionally beyond a certain point. Well, why is that? Because I can't hold it for me. Oh, my lover, when I'm pissed off about something, I'm only able to be with this person and really be authentic and genuine and vulnerable to the point that I can accept that that part that feels vulnerable isn't, I'm not judging it.
Hmm.
So that's ultimately what came up for me in that. And that's, this is my message. Like it starts with us. And the cycles and the conditioning and the deprogramming, like that has to start with us so that all that stuff can finally be put to an end. And a lot of times unconsciously we seek validation, we seek so much of the things that we need. We're outsourcing that love, we're looking for it outside of us. It's like, if that person loves me, I'm going to be good enough. If that person connects with me in this particular way, that means I'm worthy. If I'm seen in a certain way, then that means I'm finally good enough. I can make it. And it's all codependent.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just, what really brought me to this is I'd ended a 7-year relationship with a man who I was deeply in love with, and we were deeply and mutually in love with each other, and we were super codependent.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really understand what codependency meant or was. And again, so this journey into inner intimacy helped me to start to recognize the level of codependency in me, my needs, my tendencies, um, how that caused me to show up in love, the ways that I compromised or the ways that I um, you know, gave too much or took too little or whatever. So it was just a really deep and rich time of shedding and simultaneously harvesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you had to let go of that relationship and take stock and realize the ways that you had been overgiving. And then you were able to start loving yourself the way that you needed to be loved, once you stopped like sacrificing yourself.
And one thing I'll add that is a really big piece, because I I think self-sacrifice is so nuanced. It's all of our behaviors and tendencies are very nuanced, but one of the predominant characteristics that I saw in myself that came up was actually that of withholding and
Mm.
avoiding. So more than I self-sacrificed, I withheld love, withheld connection, withheld all kinds of stuff, sex, withheld, you know, and avoided. And so those were some of my patterns. And then when I really again looked at that, I was like, whoa, where's that stopping point where I say I'm shutting off? And I realized that it was a part of freeze for me.
Right.
Mhm.
Right, that it didn't. feel safe within your nervous system in order to be able to give, because it sounds like you weren't really able to, like, how should I put it? Because what codependency is putting other people first.
Yeah.
And so without really going inward and connecting to your feelings and needs and loving yourself on a daily basis, which I imagine was your blind spot, because like we don't know we're not doing that. I mean, I can speak to that myself, healing my own codependency. It's like we don't know that we're not checking in with ourselves when we're not, it's all a blind spot, but then after you ended that relationship, then you could see like, oh my gosh, I'm not loving those parts of myself. I'm not going inward and attuning to my own feelings and needs. So it was kind of like, it sounds like that relationship prevented you from seeing how much you weren't giving to yourself. And then when you were then by yourself, there was all of, it's, you can't blame him anymore. Like, now you're like, okay, now I can really reconnect with my own blocks to intimacy. Not that that's fun, but it sounds like you really had the courage to dive deep and learn how to love yourself, which is really inspiring.
Yeah. Because I wanted and want to love. And I did not want to shut down. And I didn't, those are not things I wanted. And that's something that was sometimes when we go through breakups or we go through loss, we can turn bitter or negative or just start to believe it's not possible or any of those things. And I refuse to believe that. I refuse to let that grow in me. I didn't want to have resentment and bitterness. And I just knew inside that that wasn't the way. And and that again can also be very nuanced, and as we have to go through our daily life, like what's the difference between just going through our life and actually creating walls and hiding behind our daily life activities? Like, how do you really know the difference unless you are tuning in?
Right, exactly. Yep, it's like they say that God or the devil is in the details.
Exactly. And it's just, for anybody listening, the biggest piece, I think, to anything is, first of all, wanting to look inside. Wanting to do that is the first step. First, you have to want to. You have to be curious enough about, hey, are the people in my life maybe pointing out some things to me that I haven't wanted to pay attention to, that I'm ignoring? Is that feeling inside of me that's saying that there's something else, but I don't know what that something else is, so I don't know how to question it or inquire? Can you pay attention and just get really curious about what are the messages that are continuing to show up in your life? What are the themes?
Hmm.
Just get clear and then say, am I curious? Cool. And then we can start to do more of the work. And it still takes more courage. You can't just want to enough. That's not enough. You have to then put some action behind it. And I think that's really where the fun stuff happens, because then we get to become new versions of ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, which, it takes courage because the unknown can be scary, but for those people who are listening and or watching and saying, oh, okay, well, I would like to start attuning to myself. Where do I start? What recommendations do you have for someone who's beginning the journey of loving and accepting themselves?
Yeah. Well, first, just tuning into some of those messages, right? Like really asking yourself, okay, what are some of the things that I feel like I'm not loving about myself? And sometimes we don't have self-awareness of ourselves. Sometimes, and this is the gift of relationship, is that
Mhm.
even though people can project, there's also sometimes there could be some truth in some of that. So it's important to look and examine each of the relationships and say, okay, what are some of the common themes, or which area of my life is grossly malnourished? What am I ignoring? What am I pretending not to know? And if you can start to like look at and start to ask some of those questions will help to lead you to what you are not loving about yourself,
Mm,
or, what you don't and what your stories and your beliefs are about your worthiness around love, both giving and receiving.
right. Yeah. And so when someone identifies those stories like not being lovable, or maybe there's a part of me that's not lovable, like I get really stressed out when I'm preparing to go to an event or whatever, like, let's say I don't love that part of myself. Like, how would you, you know, teach someone how to love that part of themselves?
I would say look at that part as this is a part of you that wants to make sure that it gets it right. It has this story in there that's like, okay, I want to show up, and I want to show up, and I want it to be right, and I want to be able to contribute in the best ways. And I think having some compassion for that part, to be able to say, okay, that's not a bad thing. Understand where that programming is coming from, probably from childhood at some point, where it's like, it's got to be perfect, it's got to be right. Have some compassion for that part. That part might cause you to get all sweaty and get all frenetic and so forth, but you can interrupt that if you just say, look at that. Okay, look at that. Isn't that interesting? I, my heart's starting to get, to speed up. I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Okay, I'm just gonna, I need to just relax for a second. What I have prepared is enough. And guess what? If you haven't put the time in to prepare, then you need to change that behavior,
Yeah,
right? Like you
exactly.
need to, why? There's many questions, not usually just like one thing. Have some compassion, slow down for a second, check in with that part, be curious, like, oh, look at you. You're stressing out right now. Okay. Why? Is it a perfectionism thing? Is that the program? Or are you not prepared? Did you genuinely not do the work to be prepared?
Mhm.
Okay, let's get honest again.
Right, exactly. And I mean, what I'm hearing from you that I love is, um, is just getting some perspective, slowing down, looking at the pattern as a part of you, not all of you. That's like it's called disidentification, in the psychology world. That's like what inner child work is about. But, it's like you, as using mindfulness, that non-judgmental observer, are then turning towards the part with compassionate inquiry, like kind of like you would with a child. And, why am I doing that without beating yourself up? And like if this was a child who was doing that, like why are you stressed out? Is it something that, you need to prepare more? Or what can we learn from this? Or is it my programming? In which case I can take a look at how to heal that later, and, I can be more relaxed now. So I think that that's a really, really good strategy. Um, and
And time and time again, we're gonna have to do it over and over again.
Yep. Yeah, because it is, I mean, as you're talking about our programming, our programming was programmed over, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how old we are. um, and I love the self-compassionate attitude that you had. So can you tell us more about what role self-compassion plays in this process? Because I think that's the key, is to not beat ourselves up when we discover this stuff.
It's so true. I feel like self-compassion is like the sunlight to your garden, right? You need you need the sun to grow things. You need light. And when we are not kind to ourselves, when we are berating ourselves, we're beating ourselves up, we're stuck in this cycle of like the self-hatred, and It does not help us. It doesn't help us to heal on any level at all. There's a difference between speaking firmly to oneself, much like you would speak firmly to a child who would run into traffic, and you want
Right.
to speak to them and say, that's not safe. And you're going to speak in a much more direct tone, but that tone is still coming from love.
Mm-hmm.
And that has the power to help to get the child's attention. And then, once they're back and they're in safety, it's like, listen, you can start to explain a little bit more, right? So there's a difference between speaking harshly and kindly when we're using the tones of those who may have caused us harm in the past, and we just bought into that program,
Right.
versus, listen, this can't go on anymore. It's time to change. That is a tone that can still come from love.
Yeah.
So it's really important to, I mean, it's very, very important to know. We've been alive in this lifetime. Humans have been here for a long time. Treating yourself unkindly, beating yourself up does not work.
Yep.
And if it works it may work for a little while, but it does not work if it's not a long-term strategy. It's not a healthy strategy at all. It's just like when people are trying to heal drug addictions or alcoholism or any of those kinds of things. It's just like, okay, I'm just going to totally abstain and I'm just going to avoid the alcohol. I'm going to just avoid this thing. That is not a long-term strategy. It actually costs a lot. It takes a lot of bandwidth. It actually takes a lot of the life force out of somebody when you're simply just trying to avoid it. That's why even after years, people will relapse and then you hear they've had an overdose or something like that. Like, it's just really, it's very difficult. My point is, we need love to heal. We need kindness. We need compassion. Even when a child is really hurt, even by a parent, they still are seeking some love and compassion until they just don't get it for so long that they just stop looking for it. And that's what a lot of us have done. We've stopped looking for that compassion. We just don't believe that we can get it because we haven't got it. And that hurts. And so what we're doing is we're perpetuating the same kind of treatment that was taught to us. And so to heal, we have to interrupt that pattern and that cycle. And I believe, and what has worked for me is by doing a lot of inner child work and truly being able to see those different parts of me as a little girl. And really being able to speak and look at that little girl and think, wow, that little girl really deserved a chance at life. And she really was doing the very best that she could.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's different than making excuses.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's also subtle. And I think that I love what you said about the tone with self-compassion might sound similar to a tone that's punitive, but the difference is how it feels, whether we feel that we have an open heart or not. And that is only, we're only able to really tell that if we slow down and pay attention to our feelings. And, because like what you just said about beating ourselves up doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, it works in the short term, right? It might work in this one instance, but then over time, what it does is it causes us more stress, and then the willpower is not sustainable, and then we wind up relapsing either to beating ourselves up or to an addictive behavior like you're talking about. And so it's, I think that you've said a lot of really deep topics that we could, spend an entire interview covering. But, all like beating ourselves up is a habit that, we treat ourselves the way that we learn to treat ourselves based on how people treated us growing up. And then we treat ourselves the same way as adults. And it's like really, important to understand that these patterns evolved over our whole lives. And so it takes a lot of patience to change, and repetition to change. And notice yourself beating yourself up. We can't beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up. It's important to slow down and have self-compassion. But I guess it's just so complex, because on the one hand it's about attuning to our feelings and needs in the present, and then it's also about healing from the past and reprogramming these patterns from the past. And so what would you say is the balance? Like, what are the practices that you do just to love yourself on a daily basis in the present versus heal from those old patterns from the past? Because I know that they're both important.
Yeah, they are both important. I don't know that you can, for me, my experience was that I did need to make some sense of the past and understand it so that I could be more present. Because the past has most of us looking back, right? Holding back and stuck in ways that are keeping us from being in the present. So you will need to look back at the past for a little bit, and not to stay stuck in it, but
Exactly.
to not to stay stuck, just to be able to make some awareness, like acknowledge. It's like in the car, there's the little rear view and then the big window in front. So we've got to look back a little bit just to see a little what's behind us, see how it's connected presently, so we can change the behavior. And when we look at our past self, I mean, the parts inside of us are older than we are right now. And so to completely ignore the past is to not acknowledge the voices of and wisdom of those parts of us that we still carry. We just haven't acknowledged those parts. And so if we can, as it comes up, look back and say, okay, I see where that comes from. I don't have to stay caught up and stuck in that, spend an appropriate amount of time, and then come back. And what I would say to myself is, I don't live there anymore. I don't live there. I'm here now, and ground myself into the present moment and just say, we don't live there anymore, babe. I always call myself babe. We don't live there anymore. Now we do get to have love.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to ask for love now? How do you want to show up now? And I just continuously remind myself, I'm not there anymore. That's not happening anymore. That's
Mm-hmm.
over. We're here now. Look where we are.
Right.
And literally, like, look around, like, look where we are. Look what we have right here. Look at all of this goodness. And so that's another important piece, is being able to see the good that you have right now in the present moment. So hopefully this is clear. These are such nuanced things that we're talking about. But again, I just want to say that in order for us to appreciate being more in this present moment, we need to look back to be able to see this is where we came from, and we're not there anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of um freedom to be had. Like, for example, I'll use that example I used with myself earlier. Like, let's say, I get stressed out preparing for things. Um, if I try to do the inner child work and say, hey, we don't need to do that. I am prepared. I'm good enough. I can, you know, relax as I continue to prepare and have a good time. For me, that only works if I realize that the reason I am stressed out is because of the patterns that I learned. Like, oh, the reason why I am that is because my dad was like that. And now I can let it go because it's not mine. You know,
Great.
I think that that's a good example of what you're talking about, because it's like, otherwise it's like, well, I don't know why I'm stressed out, and then I can't stop doing that, and so I think um a lot of times all we need to know is where that comes from, and oh, okay, that's in the past. And then of course there's deeper healing work, which I'm sure that you do. I mean, I have my own healing work. I do like neurolinguistic programming. I'm sure you have your own practices that you use. And So I'd love to just ask you to share about a personal story, about a particular pattern that you've transformed where now you can love yourself more, because I think that would help a lot of people really integrate the things that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Okay. A couple, well, I'm thinking about a situation and a scenario that I'd like to share. But before I share that, I'd like to just talk about some of my current self-care and self-love practices.
Oh, good. I think that's
Okay.
great.
One is that I have a mindset that I have and a belief set, a heart set that I want to feel good for me,
Mm,
for my own personal experience and enjoyment. I want to feel good for myself. And that is very different than the approach I used to have, which is I'm getting dressed and I'm going to work and I got to look good for everybody else and I want to be in a good mood for everybody else. And then if I was on I had a day off and I just wanted to feel frumpy, well, then I'm just going to feel frumpy. And there's nothing wrong with feeling frumpy or feeling any of those things. But if that's a habit and that's a pattern, and it was, then we're not putting ourselves first. And so for me, my understanding of self-love and self-care is that I get to feel good for myself, that
mhm.
I feel optimized, I feel alive, I feel vibrant, whether I'm going to be on a podcast, whether I'm going to be speaking to anybody or not, doesn't matter. If I have nothing to do, I want to feel good for me. So what does that take? So each day I check in with myself every morning. How am I feeling? What do I need today? This morning, I just came off of a really big weekend. I led a big retreat. Had lots of people, and I was really tired. I just was like, I felt energetically drained. As much energy work as I do during the week as I'm training, as I'm teaching, I was like, oh, okay. So what do I need right now? I check in. I need to go in nature. So I went for a walk this morning. I'm like, the first thing, I'm just going to put my hat on. I'm not going to I need a walk. I need to be in nature. I take my time. What else do I need? I need to go and steam, or I need to do a cold plunge. So essentially, in the morning is always a check-in. Where are you at and what do you need? I always involve some kind of breath work and some kind of movement, always. And I prioritize that because I can't give from an empty cup, and I don't want to give myself the leftovers. I don't want to give myself the attention after I've given everybody else what I think that they need or what they say they need or what they're paying me for. I deserve it for my experience in life.
Exactly. I think that that is a wonderful demonstration of that principle, because we've all heard that too, that, you can't give from an empty cup. You have to fill your own cup first. But this is what it actually means to do that, is to do our own self-care first, which looks different for everybody. Some people need to meditate or visualize their day or do some kind of movement practice in order to feel like they're giving to themselves. But I completely agree. I need to do the same thing too. If I show up for a client or even for a friend before I'm connected to myself, then when I notice later that when I do connect to myself, that my inner child feels resentful. Like I
Oh.
feel more depleted, because I feel like I need to center myself first. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
And you know what? I think that this has a lot to do. This is my feeling and how I have actually felt even different in my professional life after embodying this principle. I think that this has a lot to do with imposter syndrome. When we're not taking care of ourselves, we can have all of the education, we can have all the experience and all the credentials and all those things, but when we're doing things for other people, in some ways that's kind of just a song and a dance when we're not actually embodying it for ourselves. It's one thing to know it, and it's another thing to actually embody and do it and be it.
Yeah.
And if you really be it, then even on those days where it is a little bit more challenging and maybe you don't get as much of the practice in or what have you. You're still, you have an honest relationship with yourself. And you can feel, that's actually how you can be more confident, because you have trust with yourself. You have trust with yourself because you have a relationship with yourself that is a primary relationship and is more important than putting, like, you're not putting somebody else's needs before yours. And that's, again, that's a nuanced kind of statement, right? But I mean, hopefully people get the gist of it. It's like the intention. Put the mask on yourself first, put the air mask first, and then you're going to be better equipped to help other people.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's these practices is how you do that, because when I first started doing self-care practices, my mind said it was contrived, but it's like, well, I mean, how do you know that you love someone as you spend time with them? And you have to spend time with yourself in order to love yourself. So, um,
Yeah,
I mean, do you
beautiful.
want to share any more about your personal journey?
Yeah, yeah. I would just say there was something I wanted to share just a second ago, and it just left my mind. So if it comes back, I'll come back to it. But um, one of the things about my own personal journey that I noticed, I would say even more recently, because we're always evolving. I'm always choosing to evolve. I'm always curious about what else is possible. What else do I learn? But as it relates to self-love, and I got to I got to recognize how I had some expectations of one of my children, and how I think that, like, if you dress like this, or if you show up like this, or if you do this thing or wear your hair this way, then that's going to be better for you. You are going to be more respected. People are going to take you more seriously. You're going to get a better job, those kinds of things. And it was a very subtle thing. I have a wonderful relationship with my children. So it was interesting to catch it. It was like on a road trip. So we're sitting, side by side. And I just feel like road trips can be so profound. And it was in this moment that I was talking that I found this projection. And of course, as a mother, I want my child to have the best. And what I recognized was, okay, where am I still playing into external expectations of me, that I am projecting this onto her? What parts am I not accepting about myself? And it was, again, a very curious thing, because I'm like, well, I feel like I do accept myself, you know, and I do. And there's just this other little flavor that had come up, that I just had to say, she gets to be who she is. And my idea of who I think I want her to be is so limiting. It limits. Who am I to say that my opinion is the right way? That is just me perpetuating so many of these other same, otherness in life. And I just, as soon as I had that feeling inside my body, I was like, I want nothing to do with that. I don't want that. I want us all to blossom in our own unique ways. I want to give my children guidance, and yet I want them to flourish in the ways that they intuitively know. So it was a more recent kind of experience that for me it felt very grand, because it felt like it connected me to systemic issues in the world around differences and how we should show up and what's acceptable and what's not. And just, looking at how I was doing that with her, and then asking myself, well, where do I do that to me? I felt closer to her after that. And what I felt as soon as I dropped that feeling of, I feel like I just drop it like a hot potato when I'm like, I don't want that anymore. I feels like I have a hot potato and I just drop it out of my hands. What I noticed was my ability to give that transmission of love was actually being able to be received by her in a way, and I felt closer to her than what I normally feel, because we actually got to experience more intimacy.
Mhm.
And this is the thing, because we cannot experience intimacy if we don't trust. So intimacy to me is based on safety. Am I safe enough to show myself as who I am in front of this person? Am I safe enough to show who I am and accept myself for me? Do I feel okay with that? Is that, and if we can feel safe enough, then we can trust. Okay, I can trust I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to be, you whatever. Okay, I can trust. And then when we can trust, then we can be vulnerable, because
Mhm.
I feel safe enough and I feel trust, and I can be vulnerable now to really show myself, because I'm not worried about being judged. I'm not worried about being left or these kinds of things. And that's really where true intimacy arises from. And a lot of times we try to force relationships, and because of the natures of relationships, sometimes there's more closeness than others, and there's sometimes more assumed closeness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the closeness is always felt. And so I got to experience more intimacy with my child, because I was able to recognize one of the blocks that was keeping that love, that trust wasn't felt, that it's safe enough for her to be who she is, because I'm just judging, whether
Right.
I was saying it with my words or sending it through with my energetic frequency.
Right, exactly. You were internally judging her. And so she's going to be able to feel that, because people can feel when they're being judged if you're that close. And
Yeah.
that takes a lot of courage to look inside and recognize that was a way you were judging yourself and projecting it, and then let that go. And, but then you were able to have a deeper felt sense of connection and trust with her. So that's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for hearing it.
Yeah, and I think that that is the potential of loving ourselves and releasing our own internal blocks, as then we can feel more love and acceptance with ourselves and more lightness and freedom within ourselves, but then also deeper connection with others. And so I know that you have a free book, because we could keep talking forever, and I know that you have to go now. So I'd love to hear about your free book about cultivating inner intimacy, so that people who are watching or listening can take these concepts a little bit further.
Absolutely. Well, I do have a free book, a free gift, and I do talk about inner intimacy and what that means, and also provide some practical tips about how you can start cultivating more intimacy through journaling, through reflection, through meditation, and just by spending time with yourself, doing more feminine practices, not just woman practices, feminine practices to cultivate more more nurturing, all right, and more compassion. So these feminine practices of really being able to be softer, more accepting, that just help us to love ourselves much more deeply. So yes, you can download the book, and you can also set up a discovery call with me as well. And I'm happy to just answer some of the questions and talk a little bit more about inner intimacy.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. So the link is on your website, veronicalynnclark.com/inner dash intimacy. But of course, I will put the link.
Great.
If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, I will put it in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, scroll down and it's in the description. So I'm just really thrilled for people to take these concepts and actually put them into practice, because I know you've shared a lot of different practices that people could check out. But as you know, when we hear about it, it could be overwhelming. So I encourage everybody to download Veronica's book and check out and intuitively feel, what would you like to start with? And really, because the journey of 1,000 miles begins with that single step, as it is said.
Valerie, thanks so much for having me on the show. Yeah, thank you so much. Hey, be well, everybody. And yeah, just many blessings on your journey. Have fun, enjoy. Don't take yourself so seriously. Fall apart, because it helps you to fall open. And yeah, be curious about what it is that you're going to discover. And when you discover it, just hold your open arms of compassion. So take care.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye.